How do you pick the next step of your life? It can be really overwhelming when you feel like you're at a crossroads, or when you feel like you are literally in the middle and can go any direction. When you have more options, it almost makes it harder to pick, because it's not just eliminating one versus the other. It can be eliminating like 25 to pick one. Picking the next step in your life can be really overwhelming, but I think that there is a really simple starting place for you to consider. The first step is figure out what your priorities are for you in the season that you are in. Is it stability? Is it adventure? Is it doing something that you've been putting off doing? Is it a new location? Is it going to a specific location? Figuring out what is really important to you is the place that you should start in picking the next step for your life. If any of those things mean a lot more than the other ones mean to you, even if logically one sounds like it should be the most important, if that's not the one that you actually care about the most, then that is not your number one priority. For instance, if you could take a job that pays a ton of money, or you could take a job that is in your hometown near your family that you really want to spend time with, just because one pays more money doesn't necessarily mean that that is the right one. There's a lot of factors in decision making, and so you need to figure out your factors before you try to decide, or else you're just going to be overwhelmed. And sometimes making priorities is hard because all of them sound important, or you have absolutely no idea what you care the most about. And like, how do you figure that out? I think a great way to figure that out is to talk to someone who you trust, who will listen to you, and just talk it out. Talk out all of your options, talk about all of the reasons why you do things, talk about all the reasons why you're thinking about doing whatever you're thinking about doing, and see what you're most excited about. Ask them what you sound excited talking about, what you keep circling back to, because sometimes other people looking from the outside in can see what you're excited about and what you keep bringing up and what you keep saying that you're thinking about. Sometimes you need someone else to give you input on what you're actually thinking. It can be hard to sift through your own thoughts going around in your head at a million miles an hour, and sometimes just talking it out with someone else, they can put their finger on it way faster than you can. So use the people in your life as a resource. They're there for a reason, and even if you don't want their advice, they can still listen to you, and maybe by them repeating back to you what you've been talking about, giving the short version of what you've been talking about and saying that back to you, maybe that offers clarity too. When we talk, it's sometimes hard to hear what we're saying because we're hearing what we're thinking. But when someone else says it to us, even if it's what we just said, it can sound different to our ears. So figure out what your priorities are. And even if you can't, like you're just so overwhelmed, write down like your priorities, even if you don't have them in order. Write down things that are important to you, factors that you are considering, even if you have no order to them, or even if you group them. You know, like I've got 10 that I feel like are like top, and 5 that are kind of medium, and 3 that are low. It doesn't have to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like, you don't have to number them if that is too much for you, but figuring out your priorities and what is important to you in making this decision is the place to start in how to make your next step. The next point is that everywhere, every option will have pros and cons. I think there's this idea that like a pros and cons list is helpful, and it is, but the reality is everywhere has pros and cons. And if you need a pros and cons list to point out what is good and what is bad about each opportunity, and like fair, make your pros and cons list. I don't have a problem with pros and cons lists per se. However, everywhere will have pros and everywhere will have cons. So people like make pros and cons lists, and then there's one that has like 2 cons and a bunch of pros, and then there's the other one that has like a bunch of cons but like a little like 2 pros, and it's like, oh, obviously you choose the one with all the pros and no cons. Back to point 1, you still have to know what's important to you, because everything that might be good about it might not be that important to you. But if the bad things, or like the cons, the negative side of things, if those are what your top priorities are, then that is what makes the difference, no matter how many pros you can name about an option. You also need to consider the short game and consider the long game. There can be paralysis when trying to make a decision about the next step of your life, because it's like a big deal. What if you choose wrong? What if you get there and you hate it? What if you say no to all of these other opportunities that look good, but then you end up saying no to, and then you get to the one that you said yes to, and then you hate it? What do you do? But honestly, I think that if you take your time making the decision, you know, or if you figure yourself out enough to know, like, actually, I can confidently say in this moment that I want this, that I want to make this decision. If you end up getting there and not liking it, it's still valuable, because you're learning decision making, you're learning about what to look for in a situation. If you get there and you don't like it, you're going to realize why you don't like it, and then you can look back to your list that you used to make this decision and say, why didn't I see that? Was it on my list? Did I not think this was important to me? So you're learning things about yourself, but even when you get there, you're still going to be learning new things. You're going to be learning valuable skills. You're going to be learning about yourself. You're going to be meeting new people. You're going to be trying new things, and all of those things are valuable. Even if you end up feeling like this was not the best decision, or you wish you had made a different decision, that doesn't mean that you're wasting your time. You can still be learning and doing and growing as a person, and maybe you're stuck there for a while, but at least that helps inform yourself about how you should make future decisions. Nothing lasts forever. Nothing lasts forever. So even if you feel like worst case scenario happens, nothing lasts forever. Even if you feel like you should not have made the decision that you did when you get there, the next decision, factor in what you've learned about what you want to make the next decision. I think it also helps to look at worst case scenario. Don't let this stress you out, okay? But seriously, if you look at each of the options that you are seriously considering, okay, and you imagine taking each option and then the worst case scenario happening, what actually happens? Sometimes it's easier to be afraid of something happening when you don't actually know what it is. And by sitting down and saying it out loud, like, what would happen? It's actually not as bad as you think it is. Think through the worst possible scenarios and then what you would do to deal with those scenarios, because maybe the worst possible scenario would happen, but chances are it's not going to happen. But if you know the worst possible scenario, that takes the fear out of it. It takes some of the fear out of it. You can still be afraid of the worst possible scenario, but if you're scared of choosing something and then getting there and hating it, there should still be elements of your life that you like, even if you choose something that you don't like. I think this is another point to consider when you're trying to make the next step of your life. What are the things that will be the same no matter what choice you make? So like, what do you enjoy doing? If you really enjoy reading books about a certain subject, you know, whether you go to study that subject or if you take a job that has nothing to do with that subject, but you just read the books, you're going to be reading books about that subject no matter where you go or, you know, what you're doing. And so that will be something that can bring you happiness, whatever step you take. What are the things that you do with your time? Maybe it's exercise. Like maybe you love spin class. You can do spin class wherever you go, unless one of your options is going somewhere where there is no spin class. Then that would be something to take into account. Or you could just get an at-home bike and then do spin class virtually. So what are the things that will stay with you no matter what place you go, no matter what way you choose? I think that is really important to know. And I think that's also really important for like calming your fear of like, what if I get there and I hate it? Because you won't hate everything unless the only thing you're doing is going and making a decision and like doing 100% of your life in that decision. If you 24/7 live at your job and you take a new job and you're there 24/7 then and you hate it, then yeah, you might hate everything because you have nothing except your job. But the reality is like you have a personal life, you have so many things, so many parts of your life, and whatever way you step might affect every part of your life, but it doesn't define every part of your life. It doesn't change every part of your life. It doesn't take away everything except for what you have, because there are things about you that will be the same, that you will enjoy doing no matter where you go, that you can do no matter where you go. If you're a runner, you can run wherever you go. Find the things that will be the same for you no matter what decision you make. And I feel like that is something that can bring you a little bit of peace, and also is a starting place for when you get into a new place. It's a starting place for when you take your next step, because if you're switching locations, if you're switching a lot of things in your life, you can focus on the things that will stay the same, and that can bring some continuity. And I think that there is some peace in like continuity and consistency in our lives. Okay, so the long game and the short game. You have to consider the long game and the short game. In the short term, certain things will be harder, but then in the long term, those things might be easier. Whereas if you would take a different route, it might have easier things in the short term, but make it harder in the long run. It's important to think about the short game and the long game, because chances are there will be difficulties along the way, and chances are certain opportunities will be easier to begin and certain opportunities will be harder to begin. Take, for instance, going back to school or going into a job. If you're going back to school, it'll be easier to meet people because you'll be in a school setting, a university setting. But then in the future, you'll have to do job hunting again. But if you take a job, you'll have a job with that element of security, but then you'll have to work harder at making friends. But then by working harder to make friends, those friends that you make will be living in the same place as you, and there'll probably be people who will be long-term living in the same place as you, so those could be long-term friends. Whereas at university, if everyone leaves after they're done studying, the friends you make there will be gone, and then you'll have to make new friends whether you stay or whether you go somewhere else. So I feel like making a decision about the next step of your life isn't what will be easiest, and it isn't to avoid difficult things, because whatever way you choose, there are going to be things that are just hard or harder at some point. Sometimes you are in a place where you can deal with more difficult things up front and it'll make your life easier, but sometimes you just need an easy way, and you know that it'll be things that you have to work out later, but you are not ready to deal with them, and so that makes your decision all the easier. Picture yourself in the next step that you may take in the short game and in the long game. And that is another way to weigh your options out and figure out what you actually want. If you're weighing out what you want for the next step of your life, if you in this moment end up deciding what you want that step to be and committing to it, it's not wrong. You might get there and figure out it's not what you want, but maybe that's what it's going to take for you to figure out that it's not what you want. And that is not a failure. And that's not the worst thing in the world, because then you're not walking around your whole life saying, I wish I had tried that. I wish I had taken that opportunity. I wish I had done that. So don't let the fear of taking the wrong step paralyze you, because whatever step you take will add value to your life, even if it's just teaching you what you don't want. Choosing the next step of your life is something that is a big deal and that you should put thought into, but don't let the fear of picking wrong paralyze you, and don't let the stress of it decapitate your decision-making skills. Figure out what you're excited about, what you want for your life, where your career will do well, but also where your personal life will do well, because that is a huge part of you. It's exciting to choose what's next, and it's a big deal, and you can do it because you know yourself better than you think you know yourself. But sometimes it does take quite a bit of figuring out to figure out what you know. I hope this helped as a starting point for picking your next step. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you in the next one.